She's just a translator. My father said that loudly in front of everyone. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Leona Brooks. I'm 41 years old. I've served the United States Army for 19 years, mostly behind the scenes, mostly in silence. My official title reads Senior Linguistic Analyst for the Joint Strategic Command. But unofficially, I've diffused more threats with words than most people with bullets. Today I stood in the far back of a glass-paneled room on the 17th floor of the International Diplomatic Council where representatives from 13 allied nations gathered for a high-risk, high-stakes summit. On paper, I was there to assist with multilingual protocol transitions. In reality, I was there to verify the truth. My father didn't know that. Henry Brooks, U.S. Ambassador, and my father by blood alone stood confidently near the oval table, surrounded by aides and ministers. He looked like he belonged. I looked like furniture. "Who's that in the corner?" asked the French military attaché, subtly pointing in my direction with a raised chin. Henry didn't even turn. His voice was casual, too loud for the setting. "She's just a translator," he said dismissively. "Temporary contract. Don't worry, nothing sensitive passes through her." Several heads turned. A few chuckled politely, including the Frenchman. One aide American whispered something and stifled a grin. My father sipped his coffee like he'd said something clever. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I'd heard worse from him. From others, from the ghosts of men who underestimated women in silence and under fire. But this time, it wasn't just about me. And this time, I wasn't here to translate. I was here to listen and act. Behind my back, I held a thin, dark folder marked with 3 stamps. One from NATO, one from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and one in a language few in that room could read: Arabic. Naughty dialect, Central Arabian. The language of the next betrayal. The setting was supposed to be symbolic: high ceilings, light wood. The flags of every participating country displayed in equal height. Cameras blinked from ceiling recesses. Everyone behaved. Everything was staged except for the truth. And the truth had no interest in protocol. They asked everyone to sit. I remained standing near the rear glass wall, hands clasped, face calm. Then the door opened, and a man in a dark olive uniform entered. He walked with the slow precision of someone who had watched many others fall. General Fayez Al-Fid, Supreme Commander of the Middle Eastern Coalition Forces, decorated, feared, fluent in 3 languages officially. But I knew better. He knew 5. 6 if you count the one only a handful still speak. He sat down across from my father. The temperature in the room dropped by 2 degrees. Then the general spoke in flawless obscure Arabic. No one moved. After 30 minutes of pleasantries, half-answers, and diplomatic fencing, the room shifted. It always does when power tilts. General Al-Fid had waited long enough. Without signaling, without warning, he leaned forward, looked directly at my father, and began speaking. But not in English, not in modern standard Arabic, and not even in Levantine, which most military advisors could follow. No, he spoke in Nadi Arabic, specifically the tribal register, used by the old warrior families of Central Arabia. It was formal, ancient, and layered with cultural nuance. Think Shakespearean Arabic. Beautiful, sharp, deadly. The UN auto-translation system buzzed, stalled, and crashed. The interpreters looked at each other. One of them, an older Algerian man, squinted and tilted his head, then gave up. My father shifted uncomfortably. He laughed once, thinking it was rhetorical flair. The general did not stop. He continued faster now, precise, poetic, each sentence more pointed than the last. No one understood, but they all felt it. The French attaché leaned toward the British envoy. Do you understand what he's saying? The Brit shook his head. No clue. Henry Brooks tried to laugh again. But this time it cracked. He glanced toward the back. That was when he saw me. Really saw me. His smile froze. The room turned slowly. All eyes drifted toward me. I stood completely still. My hands were no longer behind my back. The folder was gone, replaced by a single earpiece I had quietly inserted. Even the general's aide looked at me, eyebrows raised. There it was, the moment between the storm's approach and the thunderclap. A translator, a daughter, a soldier, and the only person in that room who understood what was just said, I replied calmly. Then came the 6 words. I took a step forward. No rush, no grand gesture, just enough for my voice to reach. I met my father's eyes first. Then I looked at the general with complete clarity. I replied in naughty, matching his tone and dialect syllable for syllable. I did not translate. I responded. And not just with language, but with lineage, with lived understanding. I didn't just know what he meant, I knew what he didn't say. I filled in the air between his words. I ended with a respectful pause and a formal honorific known only to tribal warriors. Silence. The general blinked. Once, then slowly, deliberately, he stood. He placed both hands behind his back, looked around the room, and in clear measured English said 6 words. She's why your country is still standing. He saluted me. Not my father, not the council. My father's face drained of color. One of the aides gasped. Another dropped his pen. Someone whispered, "What just happened?" But no one moved. And for the first time in my career, the silence wasn't a burden. It was respect. The moment the council adjourned, I disappeared from the room. Not in shame, not in pride. I had simply learned that staying too long after a moment like that only invited explanations, questions, noise, and I preferred silence. But silence didn't last long. As I reached the end of the hallway, a man in desert fatigues approached me with brisk, practiced strides. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and Egyptian by accent and insignia. He didn't introduce himself. "Lieutenant Colonel Brooks," he said formally. "General Allard requests a private moment." Now I looked at him without expression. "Regarding?" He didn't blink. He said you'd understand. I didn't. Not yet. But I nodded anyway. They led me not to one of the side lounges or briefing rooms, but to a low-at security vestibule 2 floors below. No windows, soundproofed, just 2 chairs, 1 camera, and a wall-mounted display that was turned off. The general was already inside. He stood when I entered, but did not salute. Neither did I. He dismissed the aide with a nod and waited for the door to shut behind us. Then he simply said, "I wondered if it would be you." I didn't answer right away. I studied him, his posture, the tightness in his jaw, the slight tremor in his left hand. Not fear, memory. "I don't believe we've met before, General," I said carefully. He tilted his head. "Not formally." He opened a soft leather folder from the table and slid it across to me. No stamps, no seals, no agency logo, just an old photograph, grainy yellowed at the edges. A desert. 3 figures in the distance. 2009, outside. "Taji," he said. I blinked. That wasn't possible. I sat slowly, my fingertips brushing the photo. One of the figures was unmistakably my husband, Captain Julian Price. The other 2 were unidentified, but the one in the middle wore a scarf I recognized. "Mine." "That girl," the general said softly, got through a zone no man dared cross. She spoke to a local warlord in a dialect even our side didn't know existed. She negotiated safe passage for my wounded. She saved 32 lives. My mouth went dry. I whispered, "That was classified." He nodded. "Until you spoke today." My father had dismissed me in front of the world as just a translator. But this man, this general, had known me from a moment I thought no one had recorded. He continued, voice low. "Reverend, when the brief reached my desk that you were assigned to this summit, I intervened. I made a request. You were not randomly chosen." I asked, "For you specifically?" I stared at him. "I thought the file was destroyed." I said, "It was. But some memories stay long after paper burns." The room fell quiet. Again. But this time it wasn't professional silence. It was personal. I remember that mission, I murmured, eyes still fixed on the photo. We weren't supposed to survive it. And yet you did, he said, because you knew which words could stop a bullet. I closed the folder. He didn't ask me any questions. He didn't offer further praise. He simply stood again and said, "Thank you for not correcting your father earlier." That kind of restraint is rare. I stood as well. He never saw me, I said quietly. The general's eyes met mine. Then maybe now he will. He extended his hand. I took it. It was only after he left that I noticed the envelope tucked beneath the folder. No name, just a red wax seal. When I opened it, a single sheet of paper slid out. It contained coordinates, a code name I hadn't heard in years, and a handwritten note. We never forgot. You are still needed. I folded it carefully, slid it into the inside pocket of my uniform. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't just a translator. I was back on the map. 3 years ago, I was in a concrete basement in Amman, listening to an audio file that had already been marked irrelevant. It was a raw intercept from a failed arrest near the Always district, low quality, muffled by panic and gunfire, buried under a dozen other signals. Intelligence had labeled it a non-essential local dispute. The suspect had died before he could speak a second sentence. But there was something in the way he had said the first, not the words themselves. The tone, a glottal vibration on the consonant in followed by an elongation of the final ah. It wasn't Jordanian. It wasn't Levantine at all. It was Hijazi Sidai, and nearly extinct dialect from the old trading routes between northern Saudi and the western Jordanian border. I remember freezing when I heard it. No one else in the task force would have caught it. Not because they weren't good, but because most AI and training programs had purged dead dialects decades ago. I hadn't. I ran the audio through a manual phone analyzer I kept offline. Yes, the same clunky program I wrote myself during language school. It gave me a match probability of 73%. More than enough for me to flag it. I cross-referenced known mosques, schools, and underground stations along the Sidai corridor. Within 48 hours, we traced 2 suspected handlers moving west toward the refugee corridor near Man. 2 days later, one of them was captured carrying a schematic for simultaneous attacks in Ankara, Munich, and DC. It didn't make the news. It was never supposed to. The public heard about a foiled attack thanks to anonymous intelligence. No names were given, no medals awarded. That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was that the report vanished. I submitted the analysis to CENTCOM under my temporary assignment code anonymized per protocol. I waited weeks for follow-up. None came. Eventually, I assumed the file had been buried, shredded, or absorbed into a black log no one would revisit, but someone had kept it. I know that now because tucked inside the red sealed envelope General Alfad left me was a duplicate of that original audio file. Same timestamp, same file name, and at the bottom translated, indexed, and decrypted by L. Brooks. No one outside a Tier 1 clearance circle should have had access to that attribution. But Alfad had it, and that meant he didn't just remember the mission in Taji. He'd been watching ever since. Why? Why me? I stared at the paper in my hands as the hallway buzzed faintly. Behind me, voices passed, heels clicked, but it all felt far away, like I was underwater, staring up at a surface I could no longer break through. The woman in that audio room had been me, quiet, meticulous, invisible. But somehow that woman had left a mark on a man halfway across the world. A man whose voice now carried weight across borders, alliances, continents, and she had done it with a single word. A word no one else had even heard. I flew back to Fort Bragg the next morning. No briefing, no debrief, no escort, just a one-line encrypted message report to S2. Confidential review, no record. I didn't ask questions. By the time I reached the intelligence wing, the sun hadn't yet risen. The corridors smelled of black coffee gun oil and sleep deprivation. Familiar. A civilian analyst opened the door to the CIF. He didn't look up. They're waiting. Inside, 3 people sat around the table. 2 I didn't recognize. The third was Colonel Rothstein. Diameter cold eyes. Hands clasped in front of him like a chess master who already knew the last move. No one said my name. The screen on the far wall lit up. A report file flickered into view. I recognized it instantly. Case unsub. Intercept Sadai Linguistic Trace Date May 3, 2022. Amon Jordan Attribution. Analyst L. Brooks Coney's Liaison Lang Ops. I hadn't seen that file since the week I submitted it. But this one was different. This one had annotations in Arabic, fluid handwriting, military cursive. I leaned in. Whoever she is, she does not miss patterns. Give her no rank, no badge, only access. And let her listen. Signed General Alid. I kept reading. There were more notes circled. Phonetic breakdowns, maps, movement traces, crossbar leaks, even one line in red ink. Find her again before someone else does. I felt something stir inside me. Not pride, not even fear. Recognition. Someone had seen me. Not the uniform, not the resume, just me. The way I listened, what I heard, the part of my job no one ever read in evaluations, the silent part. Colonel Rothstein finally spoke. That file was pulled from blackout 6 weeks ago. Not by us. Not by CENTCOM. By him. He tapped the screen. Your father thinks you're a translator. The general thinks otherwise. I didn't answer. The civilian to his left leaned forward. Do you want to remain silent? Lieutenant Colonel stared at the table. The oak grain shimmered under the overhead light like shifting dunes. My fingers traced a small knot in the wood. There was something grounding about not speaking. Silence had been a shield most of my life. I wasn't raised to interrupt. I was trained to listen. Colonel Brooks, the analyst, said again softer this time. Do you want to keep being unseen? I thought about my father. How he had introduced me at every family function as his daughter who listens to foreign chatter. How he smiled politely when I said I worked with encrypted languages, then changed the subject. How he never asked what I actually did. And how when I finally spoke in that diplomatic room yesterday, he looked at me like I was a stranger, like I'd betrayed him simply by existing in a truth he never cared to know. I looked up at the 3 of them. I don't know yet, I said finally. And it was true because silence wasn't just safety anymore. It had become identity. And I wasn't sure who I'd be without it. I was 8 years old the first time I realized my name didn't echo the way my brothers did. At every dinner party, every fundraiser, every embassy event in D.C., my father, Ambassador Henry Brooks, would gesture toward my older brother and say with pride, "This is Daniel. He'll be the one sitting in that chair. One day, mark my words." He never said what chair, but it was always understood. A diplomatic seat, a place at the table, a future sculpted in suits, handshakes, and fluent French. When guests turned to me, my father's voice would soften, indulgent, almost apologetic. And this is Leona. She's sharp, quiet, good at languages, like I was a well-trained bird kept in a cage lined with international newspapers. He never said I was brave or clever or capable of command. Just quiet. Daniel, on the other hand, could light up a room before he even opened his mouth. Blonde, charming, Harvard-bound by age 17. When he was invited to shadow a congressional aide in the summer before college, my father practically wept. When I turned 17, I told him I wanted to enlist. He looked at me like I'd spit on the American flag. A translator in a helmet is still a translator, Leona, he said. You're wasting your potential. No, I said quietly. I'm honoring it. He didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. I thought he'd come around after my first deployment. He didn't. I thought he'd call when I received my commission. He didn't. Not even when I made lieutenant colonel. The only time I ever saw a glint of something close to pride in his eyes was the day Daniel made deputy director of policy planning at State. We were at a family Christmas dinner. My father raised his glass and toasted Daniel as the true legacy of the Brooks name. I was sitting right there. He never looked in my direction. For years I convinced myself that his silence was neutral. That perhaps he respected my choices in some distant cold way. That maybe buried beneath his disapproval was a quiet pride he didn't know how to show. But then came the day at the diplomatic panel. When he said those words, "She's just a translator." He knew. Of course he knew. He'd read my file, the clearance level, the deployments. He saw the ribbons, the citations. He knew my voice had saved lives in rooms where silence would have cost blood. But in that moment, with all eyes on him, he chose to erase me. Because I had never fit into his vision of legacy. I wasn't the son he raised to inherit policy. I was the daughter who disobeyed. In his eyes, the military hadn't given me strength. It had taken me from him. He once told me after my second tour, "You were supposed to come back with diplomacy in your heart. Instead, you brought war." And yet, I know he wasn't always this way. There's a photo I keep tucked in the back of a book no one ever borrows from my shelf. It's old, creased, faded at the edges. He's holding me, maybe 4 years old, in front of the Lincoln Memorial, pointing toward the statue. He's kneeling beside me, not towering above. And he's smiling. Not the smile of a man performing for senators or cameras, but the smile of a father who once believed his daughter could shape the world, too. I don't know when that changed. Maybe it was when Mom died. Maybe it was the grief or the pressure or Daniel's rise. Maybe somewhere along the line, he decided there was only room for one star in the family sky. But I do know this. By the time I stood in that glass-walled conference room, steady and silent while the world turned to face me, my father had already decided I didn't belong. And yet, for the first time in my life, I didn't need him to. It was raining that morning, Washington rain gray, indifferent, unapologetically cold. I remember watching it stream down the kitchen window like veins on old glass. My duffel was packed. My uniform hung, pressed beside the door. My orders were clear report to Fort Bragg by 1,800 wheels up by dawn. I was 36. Lieutenant Colonel, 4 deployments behind me, fluent in 6 dialects of Arabic, chosen for a classified mission I couldn't even tell my own reflection about. And still, I waited for him to come downstairs. When he did, he didn't look at me. Just walked to the coffee machine, same as always. Same jacket, same tired leather elbows, same silence. I finally spoke. "Dad, I'm leaving today." He didn't turn, so I gathered. "I thought you might want to say something." He stirred his coffee. No sugar, just bitter, like everything else between us. Then he said it softly, like a sigh, disguised as a sentence. "A woman like you is tests Arabic in the desert. You could have been at the embassy in Cairo or working with policy in Geneva." I stood frozen. He kept going. "Instead, you're out there, translating for men with rifles, chasing shadows, playing soldier." I opened my mouth, closed it again. Because what could I say that I hadn't said before? That it wasn't just about languages. That I understood the stakes better than most of the men in those rooms. That some of the most critical decisions in conflict zones hinged on the tone of a verb, the breath between 2 words, the weight of silence after a sentence. But none of that mattered to him. To him, I was a secretary with a sidearm. I didn't argue. I just stood there. He finally turned around and saw the tears already welling in my eyes. "You're too emotional for war," he said. And I finally replied, "No, Dad. I'm too human for your world." That was the last thing I said to him for over a year. He didn't hug me. Goodbye, didn't write, didn't ask where I was being sent. But I remember walking through that rain duff on my shoulder boots, hitting wet pavement, and thinking he didn't lose a daughter to the war. He lost her long before that to his own blindness. My brother's name was Jonathan. Jonathan Brooks, a name that sounded like a Senate candidate, a name my father carried in every introduction, like a badge of proof that his bloodline would endure. When we were kids, Jonathan was the Golden Boy Eagle Scout debate captain handshake firm at 12. He Followed Dad into diplomacy, the way some boys follow their fathers into fishing. I followed no one. We didn't speak much after I enlisted, but I still remember the mission. It was in Yemen 5 years ago. A joint operation between our special forces and local units targeting a compound that intelligence said housed a senior logistics coordinator for an extremist cell. The operation was supposed to be surgical. In and out, no noise, but something leaked. 2 American soldiers died that night. One was 23. The other had just found out he was going to be a father. At the time, I was working black side logistics in Bahrain. My clearance gave me access to the field reports, not the redacted ones. That filtered to embassies, the real files. I remember the moment I saw his name, Jonathan Brooks. He hadn't meant for it to happen that much. I believe his team had been working parallel channels for regional negotiation, low-level diplomacy between unstable tribal coalitions. Somewhere, someone misread his signal as a green light. Or maybe he said too much over the wrong line. I'll never know which version is true, but the result was the same. 2 men never came home, and then the file disappeared. A week later, the ambassador to Jordan, my father, called a private session with Central Command. Civilian attaché. He made a few calls. Strings were pulled. The incident was reclassified as a miscommunication between units. No fault found. Internal memo sealed. My brother was quietly rotated to a new assignment in Brussels. No one ever spoke of it again except me in silence. I never told anyone I knew. Never asked Jonathan for his side. I didn't need to. I could see it in his eyes the next time I saw him, haunted hollow. The kind of regret that follows you like breath on your shoulder. And I forgave him. Not because he asked, but because someone had to choose not to destroy him when no one else would say the words. Still, I couldn't forget the part that twisted deeper than anything. My father forgave Jonathan for the deaths of 2 soldiers. But he never forgave me for joining the army to begin with. He protected his son. He erased his shame. But me, he just erased. The envelope was ivory heavy and bore no return address. Just a red embossed seal from the United States Department of State. It had been slipped under my door. At Fort Bragg. No knock, no escort, just paper, silent and soft. And yet it weighed more than any weapon I'd ever carried. I unfolded it slowly. My hands weren't shaking, but my chest felt tight. There was no rank insignia. No. To the attention of Lieutenant Colonel just Leona Brooks. The letter was brief. 2 paragraphs. Every word measured, no excess ink. You are hereby invited to consider a transition to the Office of Strategic Multilateral Analysis under the Bureau of Global Intelligence and Research. Your linguistic, cultural, and field expertise is considered critical to emerging interdepth departmental objectives. The position is advisory in nature and based in D.C. with NATO and UN collaborative elements. Nomination endorsed by Ambassador Henry Brooks. I read that name twice, then a third time. Endorsed by Ambassador Henry Brooks, my father, the man who hadn't spoken a kind word to me in over a decade. The man who once said the army had rewired my brain with low-rent patriotism. The man who told me just before I deployed to Syria that nothing good comes from a woman trying to play soldier. And now he was sponsoring me for a position that would put me in a room with the same world leaders he once said I'd never understand. I read the letter again and then again. This wasn't from the Pentagon. This wasn't a reassignment. It was a pivot. A different battlefield. The kind fought in suits behind tinted glass with words and winks and buried meanings. The kind my father had spent his entire life in. And now he was pulling me toward it. Why had someone forced his hand after the meeting with General Alford? Was this damage control? A way to rebrand the translator daughter who turned out not to be so silent or worse? Was it guilt? Had he watched me speak flawless Nagdi Arabic and realized for the first time what he had ignored all these years? Was this his way of saying sorry without saying it? The offer was too specific, too tailored. They didn't want a generic analyst. They wanted me. Me with my war files, my scars, my accent knowledge, my silence. A new position, no uniform, no visible command, just influence, hidden. Surgical. It was a place where a person like me could do more than translate. It was a place where I could shape decisions before they became policy. But it was also a place where I would disappear again. Out of the field, off the front lines. No more team, no more dirt. No more hearing a soldier breathe through fear beside you. It would be safer and colder. I folded the letter. Once, then again. The last time I was offered a choice like this, I was 24. The CIA wanted me for a linguist tract. I declined. I had chosen the army. Instead, boots, brothers, code, fire bases. I had chosen to be seen. And now, I had to choose again. Only this time, my father wasn't standing in the doorway trying to stop me. He was holding the door open. Or was he setting a trap? I placed the letter on my desk beside my challenge coin, beside a picture of my late husband, beside a folded flag. And I stared at it until the words blurred. What do you want from me now? Dad, validation, redemption, control, or God help me? Was this the first time in your life you actually saw me? It slipped out as I refold the letter, just a smaller rectangle of ivory paper tucked beneath. The final crease, like an afterthought. But it wasn't an afterthought. The handwriting was my father's. I knew it. Instantly. His cursive always leaned too far right, like it was rushing ahead of itself. Every T he crossed with a short, angry slash. It was a habit born from writing briefing memos for too many presidents who never read the full page. I braced myself for judgment, for manipulation, for instructions disguised as concern. Instead, the message was only one line. Forgive my blindness. I didn't see you standing, but he did. That was all. No signature, no date, no apology, not directly. Just a sentence wrapped in restraint, written by a man who built entire careers out of never admitting fault. But I read it again. I didn't see you standing. And I understood. He didn't mean literally. He meant he didn't see me as upright, as worthy, as more than a background piece in his neatly arranged world. In his eyes, I was static, quiet, functional, a nameplate, a title, a box checked. But he did. Who is he? General Alfred. My husband before he died. A commander, a stranger who spoke my name louder than blood ever did. Did it matter? I folded the note once carefully and placed it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me, but because I wasn't sure what emotion I was supposed to feel. Closure? No. Nothing. About that sentence closed anything. Forgiveness? Not yet. Recognition? Maybe. I stood by the window of my quarters and watched the wind drag a storm cloud over the parade grounds. There were no cadences, no formations, just the hush before weather. My phone buzzed. An encrypted ping from DC. Another reminder. A formal acceptance. Was due by the end of the week. I hadn't replied. I still wasn't sure if I would. The note hadn't asked for a reply, just understanding. But even that was difficult, because for all the silence he had ever given me, this finally was the loudest thing he'd ever written. And still I said nothing. I slipped the envelope into the back of my drawer behind my ID tags and my husband's last letter. Some notes aren't answered in words. Some are answered in what you choose to do next. The invitation came through diplomatic channels, but it wasn't formal. No military briefing, no protocol, just a message relayed by the Egyptian attach, the general request. No press, no interpreters, no rank. I didn't ask where I already knew. The small rooftop garden above the embassy. Annex and Foggy Bottom was rarely used, too exposed, too vulnerable. But it had one quality rare in DC. It was quiet. He was already seated when I arrived, hands folded on the table. No uniform, just a sand-colored shawl draped over his shoulders, and the kind of stillness that only came from decades of knowing power. Didn't need to raise its voice. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, he greeted me. In Arabic. His dialect softened but deliberate. Or should I say the silent hammer of almond. I didn't smile. That file was supposed to be sealed. He poured tea. Files are sealed. Memories are not. We sat in silence for a moment. The wind tugged at the hem of my coat. He watched me the way a seasoned chess player watches the board when the final move is already made. You think I saved you in that meeting? He finally said. I did not. I merely reminded the room that they were asleep. You woke them. I said. Nothing. He leaned forward. I know what you're thinking. That your father finally saw you. That maybe that note was his way of making peace. I looked down into my cup. The tea was black and sharp, unfiltered. He did not write that note willingly, the general continued. He was persuaded. I looked up. He studied my reaction with a calm only war veterans and truth-tellers possess. There are factions inside your intelligence community. You know that one of them, very old, very quiet, never forgave what happened in Jordan. The leaks, the embarrassment, the silence that followed. I knew exactly what he meant. They wanted your file destroyed, he said. Redacted, rewritten, made useful. But you kept it. No, he corrected. I read it. I remembered. Someone else kept it. Someone I can't name. A breeze passed between us, lifting the scent of tea and damp earth. I felt the weight of what he wasn't saying more than what he did. They want to bring you in, he said softly. Not just for strategy, for containment. You represent something they didn't approve. A result they didn't authorize. They want me to disappear quietly, he nodded, or appear loudly on their terms. And the offer from the State Department, a test. A leash or perhaps a step toward redemption. For them, not for you. I gripped the handle of the teacup tighter. What do you want from me? I asked. I want nothing, he said. But I will give you something. A truth. He reached into his pocket and slid a thin envelope across the table. No seal. Just wait. What is it? I asked. Coordinates. Not for a place, for a person who you will recognize her. That was all. He stood, adjusted his shawl, and bowed slightly. Not every war leaves blood. Some leave witnesses. Protect yours. Then he left. I sat alone with the envelope for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single name. I hadn't heard it in years, but the memory of it struck like a percussion grenade in my ribs. And underneath the name, a simple note. She's waiting for your truth. I didn't finish the tea. I accepted the position. Technically, I wasn't military anymore. Not fully. My role was senior strategic linguistic advisor embedded in a joint task force housed in a gray building without a name 2 blocks from the capital. The badge they gave me had no rank, just a clearance level and a hollow chip that blinked red when I walked too fast. The office they assigned me had no windows, no books. Just a desk, a single chair, and a blinking screen that never stayed on for long. But I knew the language of systems. On day 1, the documents I requested were in review. On day 3, the file on Operation Alabaster, the one linked to Jordan, was awaiting clearance from another department. On day 5, my email access timed out without warning. By the end of the week, I received a friendly message from it. Your password has been reset due to unusual login patterns. I didn't request a reset. And the phone on my desk, silent for 4 days, rang for exactly 3 seconds on Friday morning. When I picked it up, there was no one there. Just a faint clicking sound like someone toggling between decisions. They wanted me to feel it. The squeeze, the ghost hand on the back of my neck. And I did. It wasn't fear. I'd walked through fields wired with pressure plates. I translated the trembling words of child informants in Kandahar. Fear didn't hold me anymore, but silence the weaponized kind. They were good at that. I took the metro home that evening, watching my own reflection in the window as the train hummed beneath the city. My reflection didn't blink when I did. That told me what I needed to know. Someone had copied my access credentials. Probably already tracked my entry points. Likely mirrored my behavior log just enough to trigger internal review, but not enough to raise alarm. It was elegant, too elegant to be random. At home, I pulled the secure laptop from the false panel in my floorboards. My real laptop, the one they didn't know existed. I never let it touch Wi-Fi. It ran offline, powered by code I wrote myself and protected by a dead algorithm I buried under 3 layers of ghost code. It still had the logs from Fort Bragg. Still had the packet from the silent mission in Almond. Still had the voice clip, the one that changed everything. But something was different. A file had moved by a single byte. A timestamp had shifted forward by 37 seconds. That was no accident. Someone had touched it and left it almost the same, like a whisper or a warning. I didn't call anyone. Not yet. I knew better than to chase shadows without proof. But I wrote one line in a draft email I never intended to send. If I disappear, start with the list from Corridor 6. Then I shut the laptop, poured myself tea, and sat at the table in silence. The silence wasn't empty. It was occupied. And that meant someone somewhere still feared what I might remember. It started with a glitch. I wasn't even looking for it. I had requested logistics reports tied to humanitarian transport routes between Amman and Aba. But embedded in the metadata of one supply manifest was a buried memo flagged but never escalated. It had passed through 4 agencies and 3 languages, each layer more sanitized than the last. It was a banking clearance notice. Origin Zurich, destination Amman, amount 1.88 million. USD, purpose educational exchange, coordination clearance, code J196B. ALF, that code. It didn't belong in a civilian memo. I'd seen that suffix ALF once before during the Almond debrief. It was the tag used for informants whose identities were too volatile to record. On US servers, most of them didn't survive extraction. Some were never real to begin with, but the memo didn't name a recipient, just a delivery route masked as NGO aid route ed through a shuttered think tank headquartered in Geneva. I traced the name of the receiving institute, East-West Humanitarian Research Collaborative. It rang no bells until I found the original registration paperwork. And there it was, listed under Founding Strategic Advisory Board. In fading ink that had somehow dodged the redactors, Nathaniel Brooks, my brother. I felt nothing at first, just a shallow drop in my chest. Not quite shock, more like confirmation. I had known in whispers and timelines and voids too clean to be accidents that Nate was involved in something larger. But I had never known the paper trail still existed or that it reached across oceans. I forwarded the memo to my offline system, encrypted, layered, then printed one hard copy and burned the original cache on the secure machine. I wasn't about to let someone misplace it. Then I stared at the page. There was no signature. No one had claimed authorship. And yet the tone was familiar. Not the words, but the spacing between them, the cautious cadence, the carefully positioned diplomatic phrasing. I'd grown up reading that rhythm across our dinner table. It was my father's voice. He hadn't written it, but someone trained in his school of thought had. And if Nate's name was tied to this, if this transfer had bypassed conventional oversight, then this wasn't just a ghost payment. It was a thread, and someone had tried to bury it in plain sight. I logged the memo under a new folder, Cobalt Echo. Then I locked the drawer and turned off the lights. The office hummed around me. Air too still, silence too intentional. Whoever sent that money didn't want it found. And someone inside the system wanted me to walk past it. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. I didn't ask for an appointment. I walked into his office in Arlington. Same brass nameplate. Same Persian rug that had muffled our childhood arguments. The assistant tried to intercept me, but I was already inside, already standing in front of the man who once called my uniform a costume. He didn't look surprised. He just looked tired. Leona, he said quietly. Not lieutenant colonel, not daughter, just a name in a room with too many shadows. I placed the Zurich memo on his desk. The one tied to Nate, to Jordan, to everything I wasn't supposed to see. He didn't reach for it. I know what I found, I said. I know who else saw it. Still silence. I need to know if Nate was involved knowingly. I need to know who signed off on that route. And I need to know if you were one of them. Finally, he looked up. Not with anger, no fire, no cold scorn, just something I hadn't seen before. Fatigue. I told them this would happen, he said. The moment you joined Intel, I told them the fire and you wouldn't stop at answers. It would burn the walls if the door was locked. You were right. His lips tightened. You think this is a game of exposure, but this? He tapped the memo with one finger. This isn't politics, Leona. It's survival. Is that what you told yourself when you covered for Nate? A pause. He didn't deny it. I buried it, he admitted softly. Because your brother made a mistake that would have cost this country more if it became a scandal than if it stayed in a file. And those two men who died, he looked at me then, not with fury, not even with shame, just gravity. You think this world is built on justice, but it's not. It's built on leverage, on what we keep quiet. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. I used to believe that until I realized silence doesn't preserve peace. It buys delay. And eventually, someone always pays the debt. His hands rested on the desk, unmoving. There are things, Leona, he said slowly, that if you touch, you won't survive. I'm not asking to survive, I replied. I'm asking to stop. Pretending this is okay. For a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Something close to regret, or maybe recognition that I wasn't asking for approval anymore. I wasn't the girl at the dinner table, desperate to be seen. I turned to leave. Leona. I stopped at the door. He didn't rise, didn't follow. But he said, whatever you choose next, make sure it's not vengeance. I didn't respond because he still didn't understand this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I've never liked traps. They assume the enemy is predictable, that they'll walk into your jaws without hesitation. But sometimes the ones who hide best are the ones who think they're already safe. So I set the briefing myself. A closed-door meeting, internal only. No press, no agenda. Published. Just a quiet calendar hold inside the Strategic Operations Wing listed under Regional Stability Review. Redacted case studies. I sent the memo from my official account, but I added 3 words that didn't belong: Zurich, Jordan OP leak, and Ambassador Sun. No context, just enough to shake the branches. Then I waited. 48 hours passed. The meeting time drew near and I did one more thing. I changed the meeting time quietly 10 minutes earlier. I didn't tell anyone except my assistant, and I told her verbally. No emails, no paper trail except one. I left the old-time 5:30 p.m. still listed on a version of the invite sent to a single person. The one man in that building who smiled too easily when Zurich was mentioned. The one who used to work under my father before transferring to policy compliance review. His name was Colin Graves. He was never reckless. Always just one step behind every major appointment, but never in front of a camera. His clearance was higher than mine, though. He'd never worn a uniform. Civilian intelligence. I had noticed his presence too often since I arrived. And now I needed to know if he noticed me. I arrived at 5:20. The room was already set. Security was tight, but I requested no sweep. That was intentional. 4 analysts came in. A legal attachés from Homeland. One quiet woman from Geneva's satellite office. My assistant handed out redacted copies of the Jordan dossier, public details only. At 5:26, I spoke. We're reviewing a pattern of transactional shifts through Zurich during the quarter preceding Operation Sandhard. Our interest is not criminal pursuit, but pattern recognition, flags. That could suggest internal exposure. No one flinched. Not yet. I let the screen show blurred wire transfers, names truncated, but the codes spoke for themselves. Then I leaned forward. One of these transfers was time-stamped exactly 1 hour after 2 U.S. operatives died during the almond extraction. It was routed through a non-profit based in Brussels. But the original account was listed under a project headed by a U.S. ambassador's son. A beat, then a knock at the door, sharp, hesitant. My assistant stood to open it. Sorry, I thought this was scheduled for 5:30. Colin Graves stood in the doorway, gray suit, calm face, but his eyes didn't match. I was invited. No, you weren't, I said, his brow furrowed. There must be some miscommunication. There wasn't. I nodded to my assistant. She closed the door behind him, slow and deliberate. This meeting is classified Tier 4, I said. Unauthorized presence constitutes a breach. He glanced around the room, judging the angles, reading expressions. Then his gaze landed on the memo in my hand. His face hardened for a moment, just a flicker. Then the smile returned. I assume you want to ask something, Lieutenant Colonel. I stood, walked to the screen, pressed a button. A waveform appeared, a distorted recording barely audible. Play it, I said. The room filled with static then. A voice, Arabic, a few seconds long, and then silence. Do you recognize that phrase, Mr. Graves? He didn't blink. Should I? It was embedded in the first Zurich wire, phonetic code, embedded in the audio clip of a debrief we ran 3 years ago, and someone used it again last month. He didn't answer. Because he knew what I just confirmed. He wasn't the hunter. He was the signal. And now he knew I was tracing it back. The room had just begun to settle again when he arrived. Rear Admiral Clayton. Marraro, retired, decorated, trusted, a legend in certain circles, and once my father's closest comrade during the Beirut stabilization years. He entered without knocking, his steps too confident for someone who claimed to be late. In his right hand a slim black folder half tucked under his arm as though it were an afterthought. I rose slowly. The others turned their heads with subtle difference. Admiral, I said, letting my voice remain even. This was a closed-door briefing. He smiled too fast. I was just upstairs. Thought I'd stop in and clarify a few misunderstandings. The word misunderstanding slid out like oil. He gestured to the folder. Security flagged some irregularities tied to that Zurich nonsense. Probably a bad relay or timestamp drift. These things happen. I nodded. And the ambassador's son, I asked casually. He waved a hand. Coincidence? No signatures, no names, no crime, just noise. But I noticed something he didn't. He hadn't asked how much we knew because he thought he already knew. I stepped aside and gestured to the table. You're welcome to sit, Admiral, but first may I see the documents you brought? He hesitated, only for half a breath, then handed them over. The folder was warm. Inside, printed memos redacted heavily with misaligned headers. Someone had rushed to compile them. But what caught my eye was the paperclip bent, as if reused from a different file. I didn't mention it. Instead, I flipped to the third page and tapped a line of Arabic text, embedded in an audio transcription. Did you include this for a reason? I asked. He leaned and squinted, then shrugged. Probably an error. Translations get messy. I looked him in the eye. Then, perhaps you'd do me a favor. He straightened. Of course. I stepped forward, calm but deliberate. Please, repeat what you said in Arabic. The part about the payment. His face didn't pale all at once. It started with his lips, then the eyes, then the jaw clenched almost invisibly. Behind him, the red light blinked above the screen. Recording. Quiet, legal, pre-authorized. I don't understand what you're implying, he said flatly. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm asking for clarification. You see, this phrase walk. Amina only shows up once in our flagged intel. It translates loosely to paused. For trust. But in financial channels tied to the Gulf, it often refers to deferred bribe holdings. He said. Nothing. The voice that used that phrase last wasn't an asset from the field. It came from inside this building. Still nothing. So I finished it for him. And that voice was yours, Admiral. He turned slowly, saw the blinking red, realized. It wasn't a coincidence that the recording system had been left on. I stepped back and let the silence settle. Around him like concrete. He didn't run. Men like him don't. They just sink. He didn't sit. He stayed standing in that quiet room, shoulders squared, hands clenched just enough to betray the tremor. A man used to commanding attention, now measuring consequences. "You think you know what you're doing, Colonel?" His voice wasn't loud, but it had the heat of something old, something that had waited too long to strike. "You think this little act of yours scares me?" I didn't answer because I wasn't performing. "This entire system," he said, gesturing vaguely to the glass walls. "The silent monitors, the blank folders is built on leverage, not truth." Leverage. I met his eyes. "That why you were in Zurich?" He stepped forward. "Careful or what?" He leaned closer. Close enough for me to smell the old cologne. Naval brand, the kind my father wore when he still thought he could command my life. "You keep pressing," he said. "And I won't be the only one who goes down. You know that, don't you?" My silence must have unnerved him because his next words dropped lower, colder. "Your father was involved in more than just policy. You think you're protecting him? You're not. You push this through and everything tied to him gets dragged into sunlight. His legacy, his secrets. Everything." He let it hang. I stared at him stone still. "Are you threatening a sitting U.S. Army officer?" I asked. He smiled again, but now it trembled. "No, Colonel. I'm informing her of the stakes." That's when I knew he hadn't come here to manage a mistake. He'd come here to see if I could be bent. If there was still a daughter beneath the uniform, I gave him nothing. No reaction, no fear, no bargain. Just the weight of the room, the red blinking light, and the quiet truth that he had already lost the one thing he valued most, his control. He left without another word, but not before he stopped in the doorway and muttered, "Be careful who you send that to." I didn't move until the echo of his shoes had vanished. Then I turned, sat, breathed, and pulled the external drive from the underside of the table. It had recorded everything from his first words to his final threat. The system hadn't been live streaming, just localized, encrypted. I copied it twice. 1-4. The Judge Advocate General Protocol for anything involving threats or coercion against active military personnel. 1. For the Defense Intelligence Agency flagged under Special Operations Corruption Oversight. And the third. That one was personal. It went to a private server, unlisted, disconnected from government terminals, belonging to someone who hadn't spoken to me in years. My father, he wouldn't respond. Not immediately, maybe never, but he would watch, and he would know that I hadn't buried him. I had chosen to show him the rope someone else had tied using his name. Then I closed the lid, shut off the lights, and walked out of the boardroom, not once looking back. It was after 10 when the knock came, not the clipped, rehearsed rhythm of someone used to command. It was hesitant, like a man not sure he should be there. I opened the door, and there he stood. My father, no security detail, no car waiting at the curb, no polished shoes or ceremonial coat, just an old wool jacket, wrinkled at the sleeves, collar turned up like he had walked here without deciding why. I stepped aside without a word. He entered like a man passing through time. His eyes scanned the small living room. The single lamp lit on the shelf, the folded army blanket over the back of the couch. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. Then I saw what he was holding. A photograph. Worn edges, a faint tear down the right side. I hadn't seen it in years, but I knew it immediately. I was 9, kneeling on the hardwood floor, head bent over a world map. My finger was pointed at the Eastern Mediterranean. Arabic letters in red markers spilled across the margins, messy but determined. He handed it to me without explanation. I stared down at it, felt my throat tighten. "I found it tucked in an old folder," he said, behind some speeches, briefings, things I used to think mattered. His voice was quieter. Then I remembered. "I kept this photo," he continued, "not because of what you were doing, but because of how you were doing it. You weren't just writing words. You were looking for something, drawing meaning across borders most grown men never see." He paused. I didn't say anything. He nodded at the image. "You were already choosing who you wanted to be." I looked up. "And you punished me for it." His mouth tightened, but he didn't deny it. I was proud, he said. But I was also afraid. Afraid that the world wouldn't see you the way I did. That they would crush you for being different. And if I supported it, if I gave you permission, they'd crush me too. He turned toward the window. The truth is, I couldn't stomach that risk. So, I took another one. I tried to redirect you, shape you into something safer, more acceptable, like your brother. I swallowed hard. Even when he failed, you protected him. He closed his eyes. I know. Silence stretched. Then, slowly he stepped toward the chair and sat. Not like a man taking authority, but like a man asking for it to be shared. I didn't come here for forgiveness, he said, eyes fixed on the floor. I wouldn't dare ask that of you. Not after everything. He looked up. I came to say this. You didn't need my blessing. You never did. And I finally understand that. He held my gaze. You've lived exactly the life I feared. And in doing so, you became exactly the woman I failed to be brave enough to raise. Tears didn't come, not from him, not from me, but something cracked. Something old. He stood, folded the photo gently, pressed it into my palm. Like a relic. Keep it, he said, because I kept it too long without understanding it. He started for the door, but paused. And without turning around, he said quietly, You don't need to forgive me, Leona. You don't even have to speak to me again. But I want you to live exactly as you've lived. Speak as you speak. Fight as you fight. You make more sense of this country than I ever did. Then he walked out. No handshakes, no applause, just the echo of truth finally spoken. Between blood and the weight of a photograph I couldn't stop holding. It was early, barely light outside. I hadn't made coffee yet. I was still in yesterday's clothes, sitting with the photo my father left, replaying the silence between his words. That's when the knock came. I opened the door and there he stood. General Alfred. No aides, no car waiting, just him. The same composure, the same steady presence. But this time there was something different in his eyes. Not command, not distance. Something quieter. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. I stepped aside. You always seem to show up when I least expect you. He offered a half smile. That's a habit from my earlier days. Old habits die slowly. I gestured to the chair. He didn't sit. They want you for a bigger role, he said plainly. No ceremony. A permanent seat, not just advisory, strategic influence across joint operations. A voice that would be hard to ignore. My breath caught, but I didn't speak. He looked at me carefully, like he was searching for something that wasn't written in reports or transcripts. But I didn't come to deliver a message, he added. I came to ask a question. I raised an eyebrow. Do you still want this? The question hung in the air like smoke. I could have said 1,000 things. I could have asked which they he meant, or what price came with the seat, or whether the hands offering it had once tried to bury me. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at the photo still resting on my table. I was 9, curious, fearless, still unshaped. By silence. I turned back to him. If I walk away, I asked slowly, who fills the silence? He didn't answer immediately. I kept going. Who sits at that table and remembers what got erased? In Zurich? Who pulls the thread when no one wants it pulled? Who speaks in Arabic when the room pretends not to understand? General Alad tilted his head slightly. Then for the first time since I met him, he let out a laugh low and honest. Still a warrior, he said. I held his gaze, even if the war keeps shifting its shape. He nodded. Especially then. Then he stepped toward the door. Make them listen, Leona, he said softly. But only if it still matters to you. Not because your father tried to stop you. Not because they finally opened the gate. Not even because of what happened in Jordan. Do it because you choose it again with your eyes open. He paused. And if you don't choose it, he added, walk away loud. Walk away so the next woman doesn't have to prove her blood to get a seat at the table. He opened the door, sunlight bleeding in. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. He just left me with a question I had already started to answer. The file sat on my desktop for 3 days. Not because I was afraid, but because the weight of truth doesn't shout, it waits. His eyes were on me, unblinking. I closed my folder. I don't need to be believed, I said in finality. I just need the record to be public. The chairman cleared his throat. This committee will recess for review and reconvene at. I didn't stay for the end of the sentence. As I walked out, flashes from the press lit the marble halls. I didn't stop, didn't pose, didn't smile. I had stood alone, but I hadn't stood in vain. And this time they couldn't say they didn't know. The room fell quiet before I even touched the play button. I could feel it. The kind of silence that pulls at your throat. Before a funeral hymn. The oversight committee had reconvened after lunch. Their ties were straighter, faces tighter. Maybe they thought the worst had already been said. They were wrong. I have one more submission for the record, I said calmly, placing the small portable recorder on the desk in front of the microphone. This was recovered from a hard drive found at a decommissioned logistics node linked to Camp Sable. It contains audio from an unauthorized interrogation. The voice you'll hear being questioned is that of my brother. A few heads turned, a few brows lifted. I pressed play at first. Only static. Then David's voice barely audible. I already filed the report. You're too late. Then a low voice, smooth, professional, unhurried male. You filed it encrypted, but we intercepted the chain. No one knows you're here, so let's talk again. Sergeant. The quality was grainy, but the fear was sharp in David's voice, in his breaths. You could hear a struggle, not with violence, but with the certainty that the world had gone dark. On purpose. There were more voices, 3 others. One gave orders. One asked questions. One just laughed under his breath. They named names, not full ones. Just call signs and titles. Colonel Hastings said he doesn't want blowback. The contract came through Ryder Holdings, per usual. Lane said he'll clean it up like last time. Someone in the back gasped. Whether it was at the mention of my father's name or the dead certainty in the interrogator's voice, I didn't look. The playback continued. David refused to give names. They threatened to mark him as hostile. One man muttered about making it look like a rebel hit. And then nothing. Just silence for 11 seconds. That was the part that hit hardest, the nothing. When the audio clicked off, no one moved. I looked around. One senator had his hand over his mouth. A staffer blinked too fast to be casual. Another woman, a civilian consultant for the Department of Defense, had tears pooling, but didn't wipe them away. Then, softly but unmistakably, Senator Ella Laner Wren from Georgia whispered, "Oh my God." She didn't look at anyone. She just whispered it like a prayer she never meant to say out loud. I leaned into the mic. My voice didn't shake. That recording is 3 years old. The voices have been identified by independent linguists and cross-referenced with deployment rosters. I've submitted the metadata. We verified it. And my brother's voice matched. I paused. Let the weight fall. What you just heard was never meant to survive. It survived because David believed someone, anyone, would listen. Not believe, just listen. The chairman cleared his throat, but no words followed. I'm not here for vengeance, I added. I'm here for accountability for those still in uniform, for those still in chains. The reporter from The Atlantic dropped her pen. I heard it clatter. Still no one spoke. I gathered the documents, the flash drive, the empty water bottle. I looked straight at the row where my father had sat that morning. His seat was now empty. I told you, I said, more to myself than anyone. They don't get to erase him. And I walked out into a silence far louder than applause. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat on the floor of my apartment, cross-legged, still in my hearing outfit. Navy blazer, tan slacks, my mother's watch around my wrist. The old laptop hummed beside me, screen glowing, with cascading headlines. CNN, Fox News, a laser, BBC, Reuters, NPR. Even The Guardian had picked it up. Breaking. Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Lane exposes Black Flag network inside. Military logistics chain. U.S. officer uncovers human trafficking tied to defense contractors. Rebecca Lane and the secrets they buried. Every hour, another outlet joined the storm. By 2 a.m. fair, Rebecca Lane was trending in over 30 countries. By dawn, major networks were rerunning clips of my testimony side by side with archival footage of David and still images of Camp Sable. Fox News had a banner. Whistleblower or patriot, the woman behind the wire. CNN called it from loyalty to law, a soldier stand. But what moved me most weren't the headlines. It was the messages that poured in. A retired Army nurse from Mississippi wrote, "I served 28 years. I always knew there were shadows in the system. Thank you for turning on a light." A mother from Nevada whose son went missing on deployment messaged, "They told us he went rogue. Now I wonder if he just saw too much. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for standing up." And then an anonymous comment buried on a quiet military forum. "I knew David. I thought he was dead. She brought him back. They owe her everything." I scrolled and scrolled. The faces eyed, seen across hearings and base halls, suddenly had voices. Thousands of them. Contractors, veterans, family members, even current service members using throwaway accounts. Some cried, some raged, some asked how they could help. A radio station in San Diego read excerpts of my statement live uninterrupted. A former Navy JAG on MSNBC said this could be the most explosive testimony involving private military contractors in the last 20 years. By morning, an emergency oversight panel had been scheduled. DOJ issued a preliminary inquiry into all 5 corporations named in David's original encrypted report. The Secretary of the Army issued a one-line statement. "We take these allegations seriously and will act accordingly." I knew that tone. It meant they were cornered and watching carefully. But amidst the chaos, something else happened, something quiet. A girl, maybe 16, sent me a video. She sat on her front porch, wearing a faded ROC shirt. She said, "They always said I was too soft to serve, but today I watched you speak, and I realized maybe they were wrong. Maybe feeling something isn't weakness." Her voice cracked. She smiled anyway. "Thank you, Commander." That broke me. Not because I was proud, but because I understood exactly how that felt. The media frenzy wasn't about me. Not really. It was about the people who'd waited years to be heard. People like that girl, like Sergeant Perez, like David, like the families still waiting for a phone call that never came. The networks had their headlines, but the real headline, we were no longer ghosts in the machine. We had names, stories, and finally, someone had listened. My father was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. There was no applause in the courtroom, no cameras, no catharsis. Just the low hum of the air vents and the sound of the judge's gavel echoing against marble in history. He stood, still as the sentence was read. Not defiant, not remorseful, just still. Like he had been expecting it for decades. Like he'd prepared for this moment not with lawyers, but with armor made of pride and silence. When they asked if he had anything to say, he shook his head. I didn't speak either. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. They wanted a soundbite, a headline, something fiery. I gave them only this. Justice is not about vengeance. It's about accountability. Then I walked past them. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything. Really. Not hate, not glee, not even relief. Just a kind of calm, like exhaling after holding your breath too long underwater. I knew what my father had done. I knew he'd hurt people, betrayed his oath, buried truth beneath rank and reputation. Most wouldn't last a day in that room, but I wasn't most. I sifted through encrypted chatter and scattered signals, intercepted pain before it spilled, found the invisible currents beneath diplomatic smiles, flagged what mattered, let the rest go. No one thanked me, but someone somewhere lived another day because of it. And I was fine with that. Some nights I'd sit with a black coffee and no music, just Silence and a faint hum from the comms line. And in that quiet, I'd remember my brother's laugh. My mother's garden. The little girl once told to speak softer, sit straighter, smile more, and the soldier who never stopped watching the horizon. People still called me a translator, or a soldier, or the ambassador's daughter. I stopped correcting them, because I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to see. And sometimes to be the eyes no one else had. I'm not just a translator. I'm not just a soldier. I'm the reason someone's map didn't bleed today. That's enough. Before we say goodbye, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning, coffee in hand? The light just coming through the window, or a late night wear? Stories like this wrap around your heart like a quiet blanket. Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with deep gratitude. And if this story touched something in you, consider subscribing, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of something more. A community that still believes in dignity, in healing, in second chances. Thank you for sitting with us today, wherever you are. We hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes, the miracle doesn't knock. It waits in silence until you're ready to open your heart. Take care. We'll see you in the next story. Soft at Han begins to echo faintly over the sound of a distant radio. I sit alone, no uniform, no fanfare, just me folding a map, the same one I carried at 9. My eyes drift to the edge of the world. No joy, no sorrow, only clarity. And the quiet strength to keep watching. My name is Leona Brooks, and that's enough.